This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below.
You know, every once in a while you run into a thing on social media that ends up becoming only a thing because people read a headline without reading the article and just straight up started reacting to the headline, which happens a lot, right? That's just where we are in today's day and age when it comes to media headlines. I know whenever I post a video, I put the title and the thumbnail, and before it's even possible for anybody to have watched what I have said, there's already a reaction to it, right? Like, people just like to react to headlines, or people react to what they see immediately, especially people who are prone to commenting in comment sections. And that kind of stuff happens like times 10 on a platform like Twitter, where not only do your comments, your headlines get amplified, but the comments to the headlines get amplified, and on and on and on. And basically all that had happened was Mary Kay had asked Joe Thomas about whether he'd like to be the Browns offensive line coach since there is an opening. And Joe Thomas said, and let me find a quote here so I can quote him, "I'm not interested at this point. I won't be interested until the NFL or college jobs, in NFL or college jobs, until my kids are in college. Maybe not even then, but certainly not until then." But you can hear that quote and say, okay, well, he's obviously not interested in being a coach. So why did I hear so much kerfuffle about Joe Thomas potentially being the Browns' new offensive tackle coach? One, because people always want former players that they love to be reassociated with the team. Remember Bernie Kosar? People want him to be quarterback coach here for like the last decade, the last 2 decades. Or Phil Dawson, people wanted him to be the special teams coordinator, or Josh Cribbs, or, you know, now it's Joe Thomas is the guy that we're focusing in on. I think people just like the ideal of former players being reassociated with the team. We see this happen in places like Pittsburgh, where like Joey Porter became a coach for the Steelers, and so on and so forth. And then you see headlines like Pro Football Talk, who has this quote. I read this quote from the article from Pro Football Talk, but their headline says Joe Thomas interested in becoming a coach. And that's what you see, right? You see the headline, Joe Thomas interested in becoming a coach, but you don't see the last 5 words on the byline on Twitter, which is someday, but not right now. So some people just saw that blur, ran with it, and went crazy about wondering if Joe Thomas could be the next offensive line coach for the Cleveland Browns. And it's not a crazy idea to think Joe Thomas could become an offensive line coach if we're just looking at this in a vacuum, regardless of what Joe Thomas actually wants with his life. Like, because he's very qualified. He's one of the best offensive tackles of all time. He's always interested in giving pointers to Cleveland Browns guys, and he's been heavily associated with the Cleveland Browns since retiring. It would make sense in a world where you don't have to consider what Joe Thomas wants to do. But yeah, like, it makes sense that they would do that. And I understand why there was a little bit of a hysteria about that. But just to clear the air for anybody who hasn't heard yet, that article definitively pretty much says that Joe Thomas is absolutely not going to be your offensive line coach this year. So who should be the Browns offensive line coach? Well, for a position coach position, that's a crazy sentence, but you know, I'm trying to make it work. For a position coach, I'm going to say this. I don't care what the name is. I know that people tend to get obsessed over the names of these hires in this coaching staff. I try my best to avoid that. The reason I try my best to avoid that is when people get so obsessed with the name that they want, we don't really focus on what they actually want from a new offensive coordinator. Like you can have two options on the table. Both these guys do the same thing. But if I'm dead set and wanting this name, I'm going to be mad that you hired the other guy simply because it wasn't the name that I was rooting for. Regardless of the fact that both these guys bring the same things to the table, they went with one over the other for whatever reason. I'm mad because I was married to this name. I try to avoid that when it comes to coaching searches, when it comes to coordinator searches, and when it comes to position coaches. Because when you fall in love with a name, that's usually when you start to make mistakes. Because when you're adding coaches to a coaching staff, it's not about the name value that they bring. It's about the fit that they have in the organization. And whether we like to admit this or not, nobody outside the building is going to have a good grasp on who's going to fit in the day-to-day operations of that coaching staff. Like, we just ain't going to know. We don't see that. We see the stuff that happens on the field on game day. We don't see what happens in Berea Monday through Thursday. Even the people who do see what happens in Berea during the day, they're not getting full access to that. Like, it's very hard to get a full picture of what they need. And the only people who do have that are the people who are in that building. So instead of focusing on names, I always elect to focus on traits. What traits do you want the new offensive line coach to have? Do you want somebody younger with a fresher approach? Do you want somebody more experienced, been there, done that, who can add their expertise to the pile? I look at the Browns' offensive line room, and I don't see the need for a extremely experienced offensive line coach. Obviously, you can hire one and it wouldn't hurt, but I don't see the need there. I think that they can get a little bit more experimental. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I think the offensive line room is pretty set. I don't think it's going to sway that much in one direction or the other. Bill Callahan is a great coach. He was a great addition to the Cleveland Browns. But also, I think it's fair to acknowledge that Bill Callahan did most of his work by the time that he had left the Cleveland Browns. Like, guys that he was tasked with developed pretty far. In hindsight, it's a good thing that DeJuan Jones was able to play this year because he got a good amount of his developmental coaching happening this year as well, since he was out there. Like, all of those things are kind of in the Browns' favor, and I don't see a room here that needs to be coached up in offensive line play in the NFL. I don't think that's where the Browns are at. I see a room here that could use some touch-ups. I see a room here that can use some adjustments. I see a room here that can use maybe a fresher approach. And that's why I would be more open to the Browns bringing in a younger offensive line coach with a bit of a fresher approach, because you do have veterans in there that have set the culture. And there's nothing you're going to tell Wyatt Teller or Joel Bitonio or Ethan Posick about blocking in the NFL that will get them right. Like, they know what they need to do. But I do think a fresher approach is necessary. Well, not necessary, but would be nice. Like, the Browns want to add some new stuff. They want to add some RPO elements, some motion, all of this stuff. They want to shake up the run game, get a little bit more comfortable running out of the shotgun. Maybe somebody who's really experienced in run schemes and pass block schemes around that. Maybe an offensive line coach who has a lot of experience with quarterbacks who can break the pocket, right? We talk about bringing in Ken Dorsey, how I think that that's hopefully going to help the Browns be able to figure out the scramble drill situation a little better, how it's hopefully going to allow the Browns to maximize the abilities of Deshaun Watson a little bit better, given Ken Dorsey has experience with guys who have similar play styles to Deshaun Watson. Now, when it comes to Deshaun Watson, how they play and throw the football is not the only thing you need to adjust to. Blocking for Deshaun Watson is a very different beast than blocking for Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco, I think he took like 3 sacks. I think Deshaun took 19 in his 5 games. And it's because blocking for blocking for Joe Flacco, very different job than blocking for Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson's a moving target. Deshaun Watson's going to move. He's going to adjust the pocket. He's going to throw around. He might break outside the pocket. You need to have somebody who might have some experience with quarterbacks who like to break the pocket and have a good experience of those quarterbacks who like to break the pocket also lowering their sack numbers, right? Some organizations where you can look at and go, okay, this might be where you want to go. Buffalo, if there's somebody who's experienced there in Buffalo, obviously Ken Dorsey, the new offensive coordinator, but Josh Allen did a really good job around 2020 of reducing his sack output significantly and taking less sacks. I think that's something that you can look at and think that that's going to be a good idea. You can also look at the Pat Mahomes, like anybody who has had experience in that Chiefs offense. Pat Mahomes, he's a mobile guy. He likes to break the pocket, run around there, hold the ball a lot. Honestly, I would be interested in somebody like from that Seattle tree too as well, especially like way back in the Russell Wilson days. Anybody who's had experience with him, because he was the ultimate get behind the line of scrimmage and move around a lot, which I think as Deshaun gets older, he's going to run less, but he's going to scramble more, if that makes sense. So I think that that's along the lines of what you want to look for. If you want to get this offense where you need to adjust to how Deshaun plays quarterback. He's not a pocket passer. Get somebody who's used to creating protections for more mobile quarterbacks. Get somebody who's used to creating run gap schemes or assisting in run gap schemes that come out of the shotgun. And I think that will be something that would be very useful for the Cleveland Browns. So no, you're not getting Joe Thomas, but those are the traits I think that people should really look for. And I do think it's super important that we not get obsessed over a name, especially at the offensive line position. I think this search we've had on the offensive side of the ball, way too many people have been obsessed with the name value of whoever it is that they bring in. This was not how they did the defensive coordinator search last year, right? Everybody wanted, what's his name? Everybody wanted Brian Flores last year. And Brian Flores did a great job for Minnesota, but it ended up being that Jim Schwartz was the right guy for the Browns, and that was the right decision. We don't need to get obsessed over the names, right? The same thing happened with Ken Dorsey, where a lot of people lost their minds about Ken Dorsey because of the name value, because he got fired in the middle of the season, but neglected the coaching history of Ken Dorsey that makes the hire at the very least make sense, right? Ken Dorsey has a ton of experience with mobile, athletic, on the run, playmaking quarterbacks. You have Deshaun Watson, who's a mobile, athletic, playmaking quarterback on the run. It makes sense that you went after Ken Dorsey, but so many people were obsessed with this name or that name, or I want this guy or that guy, that we lost sight of what you actually wanted was with somebody who has experience doing some of the stuff that Deshaun wants. And you got that. But we're losing our mind over it because it's not the name that some of y'all wanted. Got to stop being obsessed about the name. Got to start focusing on the traits, because the traits are going to be what wins football games. And I think if the Browns are looking for a new offensive line coach, it's going to be tough. You're not going to find anybody who's going to be better than Bill Callahan, but you can find somebody who's different, and maybe that approach works. Or maybe you find somebody who's fine at offensive line coach, because quite frankly, that room can live with a fine coach. Like, I don't think you need a great coach in that position anymore. But that's my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Y'all have a good day. Have an even better night. Peace.